member, then I'm happy with that. But we can never do enough education and prevention training among our campus community. So here's something I came up with. I moved to San Antonio in 2020. I'm not sure if everyone on the call knows what Denim Day is. I'll try to recap it briefly. Quite a few years ago in Italy, there was a court case where a young woman accused her driver's ed instructor of taking her to a remote location and raping her. And when it went before the court, the judge ruled that it must have been a consensual encounter because the girl's jeans were so tight that the instructor could not have taken them off her without her assistance. Well, that launched a big outrage, obviously, about it's not what I'm wearing that gives you consent. And some female legislators there in Italy started wearing blue jeans on a certain day of the year in April to protest this type of misogynistic type of judicial ruling. And so I had the idea of cutting out these little denim hearts on our tabling event on that day. And everyone would stop by and write a supportive message. It wasn't your fault. You're strong. Stay, we're in solidarity with you. Consent and respect are important. And our victims advocate that I mentioned, who's a member of our police force, it also happens to be a very good seamstress. So in 21 and then 22, we collected these hearts, and our seamstress victims advocate put together this quilt, so to speak, of these messages. And we displayed it this year, and we had more hearts that were contributed. So hopefully by next year, we may have enough for another quilt. And this is going to be a kind of a something permanent display on our campus. And the students really liked it. They liked seeing their contributions up there. Again, this is just one example of an event that we do. There I am at one of our tabling events. We do have large banners that we place around campus. Let's say for Domestic Violence Month, I've got 4 or 5 of these big banners, which I'll place in, our major buildings. Again, trying to get the word out. Tell us what you're up to there.
Sure. So here's just some pictures of some different events that we have done at UTSA. We also have Denim Day, and we had students who decorated all different types of jeans, and they had a huge display on the Sombria with jeans that they had decorated. Then this is a rain exhibit that students had decorated umbrellas. We use Green Dot for our bystander intervention. So this is a group of our Green Dot facilitators over here. This is my team. We try to get out there and table as much as we can. We were just at National Night Out 2 days ago. 1 year on our downtown campus, that's my colleague and I down there, we actually got these really great, we worked with our advocacy office. We got these really great, they're kind of like clings that go on the major windows. It's like at the main building of the downtown campus, and we had these displayed all month on the windows, so you could really see them when you walked on campus, and it was impactful because you could see it from far away. They were all over the main building there, and these huge windows where students sat and ate. So we try to do lots of different things to raise awareness. We partner with student groups and others so that they know where we are, they know what we can do to help. So those are just some of our examples too.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Suzanne, because we do have partners across campus for these and other types of events. Our National Night Out is going to be Friday night. Frequently, in addition to our table, we will have the Counseling Center have a table. We will have the Student Conduct Office have a table. We'll have the Alcohol and Other Drug Committee, University Police Department, even some of the student groups will come and table with us. And then we invite outside groups to table with us. The Rape Crisis Center has participated several times. We've asked PFLAG. We've asked, really University Health has come out several times. And so we try to make it a big event so everyone's curious and wants to know what's going on. And of course, they're curious to know what we're giving away. And all this, again, is spread awareness among our populations. I wanted to mention this particular Texas law because we do want to encourage reporting. We do know that sexual assaults specifically are grossly underreported. Our perspective, or my perspective, is we can't help a victim if we don't know they're a victim. And so the Texas legislature decided that we are required to offer amnesty for a student or even an employee who in good faith reports a sexual assault or other sexual misconduct, but they may be fearful of getting in trouble themselves. Let's say they were at an off-campus party, underage drinking, they witnessed or was told about a sexual assault, and their mindset's going to be, well, I'm not going to say anything about it because then I'm going to get in trouble. Mm-hmm. Well, under this law, we can overlook, so to speak, these minor conduct violations if they do come forward and give us a report.
Yeah, and so I went ahead. This is the policy language that we use at UTSA to encourage reporting of sexual misconduct, and those who good faith report or file a formal complaint or to participate in our grievance processes, then they can seek this type of amnesty or immunity from those types of offenses. But one of the things is it's not really for the respondent per se. So it's not really extended to that person whose own violation of the policy. So you can't try to get out of your, you can't get out of your own bad act in the relation to sexual misconduct because you're intoxicated. I mean, we deal with those differently, but it's really meant for our witnesses to be able to feel comfortable coming forward. And predominantly we see it around like marijuana use and alcohol use and things like that. They're at a party, they're at a pledging event, something. I had a particular case where there was a fraternity sorority, and we ended up speaking to half a dozen students, but many of them, either they were smoking marijuana or they were drinking, and they didn't want to be forthcoming about that. And we're like, that's not what we're going to referring you to student conduct for that. We want to get to the truth of what happened here in this matter. And then they relax. And I think that they feel more comfortable talking to us when they know that like our first call is not to refer them to student conduct for those types of infractions.
And we're not going to call their parents and tell their parents what was going on. I'd like to mention here that Title IX regulations at the federal level are very, very complex. They've changed over the years. We saw a big policy shift from the from the Obama administration to the Trump administration. And we won't get into what those changes were and whether they were good or not. But when the Biden administration came in, they made Title IX a high priority. And we are awaiting the final new regulations, again, dictating our processes, dictating definitions of terms that we use, how we apply them, how we get to preponderance of evidence in cases. For us, all educational institutions, and I should mention this includes K through 12 as well. They have to have a Title IX coordinator. Mm-hmm. We have to have mandatory reporters. So individuals or employees who interact frequently with students, like residence assistants, there's a number of different sort of titles that we know they're going to be around students. And if they, and according to our policy, if they experience, if they observe, or if they are told about a sexual harassment or sexual assault, something like that, they are mandatory reporters. They have to inform me as Title IX coordinator of what they heard or what they saw or what they experienced.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
Oh, sorry. So I was going to say, in September 1st of 2019, the state of Texas passed, it's known as SB 212, but essentially it's mandatory reporting on college campuses. And so if someone goes to their professor and says, I was sexually assaulted, that professor has to tell that student that I am required to report. And it doesn't matter if it happened on campus or off campus, they have to report all known information. And the consequences to them failing to report is that if we do an investigation because they may have failed to report, then they must be terminated. That is statutory. So our institutions can't choose another path. It is in the statute that if we find someone failed to report, then it is mandatory that we fire that person. And then there goes a step further to say that there can be misdemeanor criminal sanctions implicated there too for failing to report. And that includes our police. That includes literally the way we define it at UTSA is it's almost everyone who draws a paycheck. The only distinction we make is that if you're a student work study and you're really a student first and an employee second, now RAs and some others are exempt from that, but just like you're at a front desk at the admissions office or something, we wouldn't say that they're a mandatory reporter because they're a student first. But if you're an employee and go to school at night, you're an employee first and you're taking classes on the side, you are a mandatory reporter. And so we've seen significant increases in the reporting, and you can't withhold students' names either. So one of the things we do on our campus, and I'm sure Joni does the same, is we do have a cohort of people who we have identified that are confidential reporters. So we try to educate the campus community that you can go to our peace advocacy, counseling, health services, and we actually have a student ombuds office and an employee ombuds person. Those are 5 offices that we have on our campus that are considered confidential. So if you go to them and tell them they only have to report in the aggregate with how many they see each month, they do not have to report names, but everyone else on our campus does. So while I do think it drives up the awareness and the ability for us to provide those students with supportive measures and things like that, sometimes it can have a chilling effect because it does put a faculty member or, a student group advisor or something in a tough position where they have to interrupt that student and say, what you're telling me right now, I cannot keep that private. And so we also try to educate folks that just because you told your professor and just because it got to the Title IX office, we're going to have a conversation with you so that there is still autonomy in how you want to see your process through for the most part. And so it doesn't mean that it goes straight from the reporter to a formal complaint and investigation. There's a lot that happens in between there. But it is something that, we have to do a lot of education around because from a victim standpoint, thinking about the audience of this conference, some people can say that mandatory reporting creates a chilling effect because students, everybody they tell on our campus essentially is going to be reporting to us what happened.
Sure. And in our system, we go a little bit further as far as student workers go. If what they experienced, observed, or were told about happened while in the context of their employment, then they're mandatory reporters. If it's something that they heard from another student in a class or somebody off campus, not in their employment position as a student worker, then they're not required. It can be a fine distinction, but we really, really, really need to know about these situations so that we can provide the assistance that we can.
And I think it's important too, because like if students write it in a paper to a faculty member, they have to report that. If students report it to like our student disability services, when they apply for the disability accommodations, they have to report that. So we have to do a lot of education around this because some students are like, how did you get my information? And then others are like, how are you making me have to report this? It feels so uncomfortable. So, I mean, it's been a while now. It happened in 2019. So I think people are very conditioned to it, but there is still always a lot of education we have to do with new folks that come in.
Right. And I'll have to say on my campus, faculty members know that they have to report. And they also know if they're not sure if they need to report, they need to report. At least several times a semester, I will get a report from, let's say, a faculty member who's teaching art appreciation. And the students will have projects that they do. And sometimes their projects will reflect upon a sexual assault that they had, or some violence that they experienced at home. And those instructors will report it. Again, the student's not asking for anything at that point. It's just part of their art design. But at least it gives me an opportunity to reach out to them and make sure they're okay, and to make them aware of resources that are available if they really haven't worked through the trauma that they experienced.
Yeah, and I see Rick asked the question, like, what are the exceptions to reporting on our campuses? I mean, one I can think of is like, so if we have a Take Back the Night, or like we had National Night Out, if we're in a public type of event and someone makes an outcry, you don't have to report those that come from like public education awareness type of programs. And obviously, if they report to a confidential reporter, you don't have to report that either. In the same way, you still have to report it in the aggregate.
Sure. And our student counselors, the few people, well, basically the only people on our campus who are confidential are the therapists in the counseling center, and then our victims advocate. But they don't have to report specifics unless, of course, the student or whoever it is agrees to the report. They also provide the same type of information about resources that we would give, for a report that came in that was not confidential. And sometimes I actually get referrals from the counseling center where a student has disclosed something to a therapist. The therapist talks with them and makes them aware of what Title IX is and what Title IX can do for them. And the student agrees to come talk to me. Another Texas law affecting our college-age population is that we are authorized to make notations on transcripts if a student has been accused of sexual harassment or sexual assault and has been found to be responsible, but also if the student leaves the institution before the investigation is completed or before the resolution process has been completed. And this is intended to deter students from hopping from one university to another because they've got, disciplinary action being pursued against them. This used to be a very, very big problem. And it actually, in the athletic world, in the sports world, there were several very visible athletes who were found to have violations at their previous institution, and they left, transferred, obviously with their sports skills, were picked up by another college or university without that university or college knowing what the background and the history of that student is. Okay, so we looked at statistics when we first started the presentation. We thought we would just put out here, okay, what do our numbers actually look at? And keep in mind, you remember the statistic, only 20%, I think it's less than that, of female college students will report to law enforcement that they've been sexually assaulted. So in the 3 years since I've been here, again, very small campus. We only have one dormitory that houses maybe 300 students. We still received in this 3-year period, 44 reports of sexual assaults, 15 reports of dating violence, 17 of domestic violence, and 10 stalking. Now, there could be a couple of double counts here because, again, Student Counseling Center does not have to identify who it was that reported to them. So it could be that I was informed of a case and then Student Counseling was informed of the case, or the student went to them. So there may be a few double counts here. And also of note is very often the victim is the member of our community, but the alleged perpetrator is not. So you can say, well, what can you do in those situations? Well, we can't, in most instances, we cannot conduct an investigation because we have no control over the alleged perpetrator. But we do provide supportive measures and, reintegration into the academic community when they're prepared to do so. How about you, Suzanne?
So our numbers look very different, but then remember, we are much, much, much larger. Maybe if we had both done percentages, it would have been something a little more comparative. But this is of a 3-year period, so you can see our numbers are significantly higher than. These are just reports we've received, so it does not correlate to formal complaints that have gone to like a conduct adjudication. These are reports that we've received. And there can be some double counts because we too have an advocacy office, an ombuds office, counseling and health services, and they all report to us in the aggregate. So it's hard for us to reconcile if their reports, likely those students have used resources in all those areas, but there's not always an easy way for us to identify if they're the same victim or not. But this just gives you a little snapshot of, what we experience. And I will note though, that I think like a lot of people use the term stalking, but the statute and the definition of what is considered stalking, both within our policies and at the state level, is very different. A lot of times stalking ends up being harassment and not stalking because you need to have so many courses of conduct and you have to show fear for safety, the reasonable person, and then substantial emotional distress. So we get a lot of reports of stalking and we track those as stalking. But then when we really delve into them, a lot of times we refer them over to our police department or others for harassment. Still has to be addressed, still something that we look into, but not always stalking based on the definitions that we have to confine to.
And that's a good point, Suzanne, because the definitions we work under for Title IX can rule in or rule out certain types of cases. So, for example, the current definition of sexual harassment is that the incident or incidents must have been severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive. That's kind of a high standard. The previous language under the regulations was severe or pervasive or persistent, if I recall correctly. So we may rule out a case as Title IX, but refer it to student conduct as other sexual misconduct.
And so I think that, this is what ties us all to why we're here today, is that there is this continuum of partnership both within the institution and with our external community partners to help us provide victims, and respondents. We do have to provide for both, but I know here we're talking more about victims in this space, but to provide them with like a holistic approach of what we can do to help them. So, we have counseling services, housing offices, campus advocacy, campus police, connections to local law enforcement. And then ultimately, if cases go to a final adjudication, to our student conduct office. So it really is this like circle continuum where when students are experiencing domestic or dating violence, we can be part of that solution in providing them with resources to help them navigate their way through the situation that they're dealing with. And there's a lot of resources on all of our campuses, not just our office, but we have to have strong partnerships with those offices so that we can make sure students are able to avail themselves of it.
And if I can comment on this graphic, Suzanne, is I would put the Title IX coordinator in the middle of this circle.
It's true, yeah.
Because what we don't want to do is to have all these various players on campus tripping over each other, trying to provide services to a student or to an employee without coordination. And so I consider myself in the middle of this in meeting with the students. Okay, do you need assistance with housing? Okay, I'll help you with that. Do you need assistance with your courses? I can do that. So it is a true coordinator position and job.
Yeah.
Now, Suzanne, do you do any investigations yourself personally?
I don't typically right now. I mean, we have I have done many investigations in my career, and I oversee all of them. I review everything that goes out of our office, but we have um, myself as the Title IX coordinator, an assistant director, and then we have 4 people that are investigators, and that is their day-to-day role is to investigate complaints. To our intake person will assign it to them. They will reach out to the complainants. So there are times when I do get involved or I do sit in on meetings, but currently I don't do as many investigations as I used to do, just because of the structure of our office and how big we are at UTSA. But I have regularly, I sit on our behavioral intervention team. I regularly meet with folks about cases. I strategize with my investigators daily on different cases. So I do have a deep knowledge of all the different cases going on, but I'm not typically the person that sits in and does the interviews at this point right now.
And that's a good thing, because as Title IX coordinators, we have to maintain non-bias, neutrality in coordinating all of these supportive services and the investigations at the same time. Now, at my campus, I just have one full-time investigator, but we've trained other employees across campus to do investigations as needed. It's kind of other duties, as required, except it's not required. It's really a voluntary type of situation, but we make sure that they are well trained before they're assigned to a case. And we try not to give them more than a couple of cases a year, because they still got their full-time job to do. Very often, particularly, they've just gotten trained and have never done an investigation. I pair them up with an experienced investigator until they get more familiar and more comfortable with the process.
And
Tell us about other laws.
Sure. So here I want to talk about there's a lot of other laws that dovetail with Title IX, and we can't operate in a vacuum because we have to think about all of these other laws when we're dealing with these cases. So first off is Title VII. Title VII traditionally deals more with employees, but when Joni was mentioning that other sexual misconduct, so definitions are slightly different. It doesn't meet the threshold of Title IX. Say the employee is a bad actor or the employee is the victim. We have to look at Title VII and how we need to apply the principles of Title VII. Our office does do Title VII investigations too. Title VII also encompasses a lot of our protected class discrimination. And so that definitely plays. Title IX, Title VII run pretty parallel, but that definitely plays a role in the work that we do. The Clery Act, if you're not familiar with the Clery Act, it's our Campus Safety Act. And Jean Clery, who is a student here, was sexually assaulted in her dorm room at Lehigh College in Pennsylvania many years ago. And her parents advocated for this campus crime statistics act, where they said if they had seen disclosures about the crime on that Lehigh campus, they may have chosen not to send her there or taken different precautions. So all of our institutions are required to issue an annual security and fire safety report every year and publish on our website. You can go to any college in the whole country that gets federal funding and look for their annual security report. It will have in the back all the Clery crime statistics. Now, they're not just sexual harassment and dating violence, domestic violence, stalking. There are other types of things too, but you'll get a very holistic view of each college, and they have to list their statistics for 3 years. And then it kind of goes along with the Clery Act is the Violence Against Women Act. Many of you may have heard of that. And that is where we're dealing with our sexual assault, dating violence, domestic violence, and stalking. The state of Texas has issued a lot of regulations that we all have to comply with. Joni and I highlighted some of them for you, but every legislative session, we are keenly interested in what the legislature has in the way of sexual harassment and sexual misconduct on college campuses and how that impacts the work that we do. And then there are other privacy laws that we have to abide by. So FERPA, which if you're familiar with the K through 12 environment and FERPA, in K through 12, parents have a lot of rights regarding FERPA, which is the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, of what can be released regarding a student's educational record. Their Title IX investigation would be considered part of their educational record. But when you go to secondary schools. So when you go to college or a community college, once you've gone there, whether you're 18 or not, you have control of your FERPA rights, and you can decide what can be released. So unless there's some exception to FERPA, which could be if student has suicidal ideation and we think there's imminent risk or health and safety emergency, we may reach out to emergency contact. But on a general whole, students have to do a release for FERPA for like their parents or other people, their spouses. We're not going to release that information in their educational record without their permission. And then because we're talking about counseling services and health services and SANE exams and things like that, we also need to be aware of HIPAA and how there are crossovers with that law as well. But usually on college campuses, FERPA is what sort of, I don't want to say trumps HIPAA, because those are usually part of their educational record, even when they're dealing with like the counseling office and things like that.
Okay, Suzanne, I think we've got, according to my watch, about 8 minutes left. Yep. We have a couple of real short videos. I think we'll take question and answers first if there are any. But I hope what our presentation has shown is that interpersonal violence, domestic violence, is a big part of our campus communities and our responsibilities. Suzanne's got a small city there with a lot of people to monitor and keep up with. Mine's relatively manageable at this time, but as I indicated, our university is growing by leaps and bounds. Let's see, do we have our moderator here, or Sonia, are there any questions for us?
That was great. One that I wanted to bring up, earlier, Suzanne talked about SB 212, and there was a question about House Bill 1735. Was that also covered? Because I know that wasn't mentioned specifically.
Yeah, I mean, they're fairly, they kind of in and of the same. It's like 51.252 of the Texas Education Code now, so it's been codified, but it's essentially the same things. There's some other things in HB 1735 I could go through, but essentially I think what Rick, and you can tell me in the chat if you're wrong, I thought you were getting most of the mandatory reporting and all of that. So I think I covered it, but if there's more specifics, let me know.
Well, and I think one thing to add at both the state and federal level is that we're required to offer training to all incoming students.
Yeah.
And including transfers and so on. And so we handle it different ways. Sometimes it's in person, sometimes it's online training. I remember tabling at the beginning of this semester, and we had a lot of incoming freshmen who were there, and they'd stop by my table and I'd start chatting with them, and I'd say, "What, do you know anything about Title IX?" And, quite a few of them would say, "Oh, yeah, I heard something about that at our orientation last week." So it's important to get them early and to get that education in there. Any more questions from the chat or elsewhere?
See, Rick says that he thinks
yes,
it's important to note that the Title IX changes with every incoming administration.
Yes, it's been, it wasn't for a long time. It was very dormant. And then, as Joni mentioned earlier, the Obama administration made some significant changes. Then the Trump administration, and the different thing is they used to issue these things called Dear Colleague letters. So they were sort of prescriptive and you followed them, but they were not law, right? And then they started saying, well, these are not binding laws. So now we're going to go through the notice of proposed rulemaking, and we're going to actually change these laws, and you're going to have to comply with them. So yes, we've seen it switch from Obama to Trump, and now we're under the 2020 legislation. And then the Biden administration did do a new notice of proposed rulemaking. It was reviewed, comments were submitted. So now we are just waiting for the federal government to issue these new rules. Most of what I've heard is that they're supposed to come in October, but then I've started to hear now that it could be a little bit later. So we are just waiting for these proposed rules to be made finalized. And then they usually give us about 60 to 90 days to change all of our policies. And then we have to change our policies and effectively change how our office does our investigative work. So, and then once you change all of that, you absolutely have to educate your campus community about these changes so that they understand them. And, you know, I was speaking at another conference recently, and and an immigration lawyer was presenting with me, and she was saying that because of all the legislation, she feels like she has whiplash as an immigration lawyer. And I said to her, I was like, oh, us in Title IX, we have the same whiplash you do, because it is constantly, you know, a changing process. And then as we go through another presidential election, we will probably just as people get comfortable with whatever the Biden administration releases, we may be looking at changes again. And it is a lot of like administrative and intensive administrative labor to change this, because we are both part of large systems. So we don't just go in and be like, Joni and I think, oh, this sounds good, we'll just change our policy, make sure our campus community approves, and move on with our life. We both have to work through our system administrations to get an approved new policy, and then roll that policy through to the constituents on our campus, and then get it approved. And then it's good for like a couple years, and then we got to do it all over again.
That's intense. Do we have any other questions? We still have about a minute or two left on our session.
If not, I'd like to try to play the first video. I use it with student groups a lot. You know, I use videos a lot with students because it's good at engaging them and getting their attention. I'm going to try to start it. If it doesn't work, we'll go ahead and close out. Okay, let's see what's going on here. Well, despite our best efforts, I guess it's not. Let me follow up with one thing you mentioned, though, about the changing administrations. President Biden is very involved in this area. If I recall, Suzanne, when he was in the Senate, he initiated the Violence Against Women Act. Mm-hmm. He did. And so he's maintained an interest in this area. And, you know, these Title IX regulations were one of the first things that he picked up when he took office. Mm-hmm. I cannot see the chat, so if there's anything else in there.
Yeah, no, I think we covered. Yeah, Rick said what we covered what he was asking for, so that's good. Does anybody have any other questions for us? I think if you take something away and you're not familiar with campus communities and with universities and you're dealing with victims, especially if you're an advocate, to know that if they are a college student, even if you don't know, you know, yes, you've gotten to know both of our names, but we have colleagues all over the city. If it's UIW, if it's OLU, if it's St. Mary's, if you just find the Title IX office and as the advocate with that student, either go or call, then we can kind of sit down with you and help you figure out, you know, what the university can do for that piece, right? Because when people are dealing with domestic and dating violence, they've got their living situation. If they have children or other family members that are impacted, you know, their general health and well-being and mental health. And then you've got, I'm going to school and I don't want to like lose out on going to school. How do I preserve that? So it's a lot on people's plates. And so knowing that we're a resource as you're helping advocate with someone, or if you're, you know, social work and helping them, just knowing that we exist and that we have the ability to help, I think is really important.
Great. Thank you all for your attention and for participating in this session. Again, as Suzanne says, feel free to reach out to us anytime if you have questions or want some more information.
Thank you both for joining us today, and thank you everyone for your time. We will be back at 2:30, and be sure to come in at least 5 minutes in. Again, you can go to sessions or you can go to reception to find the session you'd like to join. We'll see you at 2:30. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.